Today's lesson is disaster preparedness. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to talk about something called disaster preparedness, which means you're preparing yourself for a disaster like a typhoon or an earthquake. You want to be ready in case these things happen so you'll know what to do so that you can be safe later on. And that's what preparedness is all about, being prepared for a disaster.
Because, of course, once the buildings start shaking, once the typhoon is blowing your roof off, it's a little bit too late at that point to start getting the emergency supplies and the batteries and the flashlight ready. That's why we talk about being prepared for disasters, having all of those things ready in your home, because when the disaster comes, when you actually need them, it'll be too late to get them ready. So let's see what's going on here as we check out our first dialogue. It's all about past typhoon experiences. And for those of us here in Taiwan, this is definitely something I think we can all relate to. Let's check out the dialogue with Ethan and Olivia. Disaster preparedness. Reflecting on past typhoon experiences. As typhoon season approaches, Ethan and Olivia discuss their memories of previous typhoons. Remember the huge typhoon that hit us a few years ago? The flooding was intense.
I remember, and there was even a blackout that lasted a few hours. We couldn't do much without electricity.
Yeah, and there were some water outages too. It hadn't occurred to me how much we rely on running water until it was gone.
Well, those experiences certainly taught us a lot about the need to be prepared. For example, we now know the importance of having an emergency plan and an emergency kit.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, it's been a long time since we checked our emergency kit. Want to go through it now?
Good idea. Let's make sure that everything is still good to use. I'll go grab it.
大家好，第一部分介绍名词 disaster， 它的意思是灾难或是灾害。例如 Last month's earthquake was the worst disaster I have ever experienced. 上月的地震是我经历过最大的灾难。或者 Several people were hurt by falling trees during the disaster. 好几个人在这起灾难期间被倒下的树木压伤。再来看到形容词 previous， 表示先前的或是以前的。例如 In the previous class, we learned about different animals. 在上一堂课，我们学到了不同的动物。或是 The job post mentioned that no previous experience is required. 求职告示中提到不需要有先前的相关经验。接着看到形容词 intense， 它的意思是强烈的、剧烈的，也可以是热切的或是认真的。例如 Edward finished his weightlifting session with an intense leg workout.Edward 以高强度的腿部训练来结束他的举重课程。也可以说 After hours of intense focus, Dan needed a break. 认真专注了几小时后 Dan 需要休息一下。继续介绍名词 blackout， 指的是停电。举例来说 There was a blackout in the city last week that left people in the dark for several hours. 上周该市发生了停电，使人们在黑暗中待了几个小时。又或者说When the blackout hit, the building's emergency lights turned on. 停电时，大楼的紧急备用灯亮了。接着介绍名词 electricity， 表示电或是电力。我们可以说 The electricity has been out for an hour. 电力已经中断了1个小时。又或者说 Refrigerators run on electricity. 冰箱靠电力运作。
Okay, now it's time for us to break down Ethan and Olivia's conversation. They are reflecting on past typhoon experiences. So, of course, they've lived in Taiwan for quite some time. And if you've lived here for 3 or 4 years or longer, you'll probably have seen a typhoon or two. And so you'll know a thing or two about those typhoons, and you can talk about these things with other people in order to prepare for the next one. So again, they're reflecting on their experiences. They're talking about things that have happened to them. They're bringing up memories so that they can learn from them. And as typhoon season approaches, Ethan and Olivia discuss their memories of previous typhoons. Previous just means something that happened before.
All right, typhoons from years past. And Ethan brings up one that happened a few years ago. He says, remember the huge typhoon that hit us a few years ago? So there must have been a really big or huge typhoon, probably so big and it affected the country in many areas in many ways for many days that people would remember it. Sometimes these typhoons have names, but also you can just talk about the ones that were really much bigger and more memorable than just your average typhoons, ones that kind of brought the country to a standstill. And he mentions one of the things that does bring a country to a standstill, the flooding. He says the flooding was intense. So obviously the winds were probably pretty strong, but this typhoon had especially powerful rainstorms. A lot of rain fell in a very short time, and maybe even the winds were pushing water up the beaches and flooding coastal areas as well. But a lot of the problem from flooding in typhoons comes from the heavy rainfall that you get in a very short period of time. He says the flooding was intense. If something is intense, it's powerful. So we can talk about the intense winds or something like that from the typhoon. They're very powerful, very fast winds. You can also talk about an experience as being intense. It was a very powerful experience. It affected you very powerfully emotionally, right? So if something is emotionally intense, like having a big fight with your lover on the night before your wedding or something like that. Oh, I thought we were going to break up the night before the wedding. It was really intense. It was really powerful, moving, and probably upsetting experience in some kind of way. So the flooding could have been very powerful, but also it was very shocking and scary, right? The city got shut down. The subway system was flooded. All of that kind of thing can also make it feel very intense or very emotionally affecting as well.
To a high degree, you could experience intense heat during the summer, or you could experience intense pain if you have an accident. We certainly hope that doesn't happen to you, but in this particular case, Ethan says the flooding in the last typhoon was intense, or at least that huge typhoon that hit a few years ago. Maybe it wasn't the last one, but it certainly was an intense typhoon. Olivia says, I remember. And there was even a blackout that lasted a few hours. Now, a blackout, of course, is when the electricity stops and you don't have any lights, so you'll need to have some candles or a flashlight or something like that, just in case there is a blackout, in case the electricity goes off. And she says we couldn't do much without electricity. That is the power that we need in our lives to make sure our refrigerators are working, to make sure we have electric lights on at night, and of course we need electricity to charge our devices.
Absolutely. A blackout. We also might say a power failure, or the power goes out. We never usually say an electricity failure. We always just generally use the noun power. So a power failure or a blackout can suddenly make modern life very, very inconvenient. Ethan says, yeah, and there were some water outages too. All right, so not only the electrical system in the city or the country or the region got affected, the water system got affected as well. Water outages. We could also actually say power outages. When there's an outage of some kind, we're talking about some kind of system has stopped working. Generally, one of the basic systems that we have in our cities, things like water and gas and electricity and stuff like that. So a water outage would basically mean either you turn your tap and nothing comes out, or the government warns people not to use that water because the clean water that we should be drinking, that we normally drink, has gotten mixed with dirty river water or ocean water and things like that, and they have to basically turn the water off or warn people not to use the water. So imagine the wind's blowing, the rain's coming down, there's no electricity, and there's no water in your bathroom or kitchen. Highly inconvenient.
Right, so if you have a water outage, you need to have some water backed up someplace. Maybe you have a water tank on your roof or something, but that was the case during that one typhoon. There were some water outages. It hadn't occurred to me how much we rely on running water until it was gone. So running water just means water that comes through your pipes in your house, in your sink, in your toilet, or whatever, in your bathtub. And if you don't have that water, you will know how inconvenient it can be, and you will also remember how much we rely on running water. Now, here's what Olivia says. Well, those experiences certainly taught us a lot about the need to be prepared. Indeed, if you have this experience, if this has happened to you, then you understand the value of being prepared. For example, she says, we now know the importance of having an emergency plan and an emergency kit. An emergency plan, of course, is an idea of what you're going to do if a disaster hits, where you're going to go, how you're going to contact people, where you're going to meet, etc. if you leave the house. And then an emergency kit is something that contains all the things you'll need in case of an emergency, which could include water and supplies, food, flashlights, or whatever.
Ethan says, yeah, absolutely. Speaking of which, it's been a long time since we checked our emergency kit. Want to go through it now? So this is a great thing and a good idea, and that's why Olivia says, good idea. Yes, this is a very smart thing to do, a very wise thing to do, to look through your emergency kit, make sure you have everything there. Sometimes some things need to be replaced, or the batteries can run out, or the bottles of water can't be so fresh. So she says, good idea. Let's make sure that everything is still good to use. So yeah, something you might want to do every 6 months or so. I'll go grab it. So obviously they've prepared an emergency kit before in the past, but maybe it's time just to revisit it, to check it out, to see if anything is in need of replacing, and to make sure all the vital things are still there. And that's what we will do in our next dialogue coming up right now.
Inspecting the emergency kit. Olivia brings the emergency kit and they start inspecting the items inside it.
First up, let's check the non-perishable food. We've got canned beans, dried fruits, and energy bars. None of them are past their expiration date.
Great. How about the clean water?
All the bottles are sealed and look fine. What about the flashlights?
Here they are. Let's put the batteries in and see if they still work.
They both work, but that one looks a little dim, so let's get some new batteries for it.
Noted. Let's move on to the first aid supplies. Anything expired?
It looks like the aspirin is expired. Everything else looks good.
All right, so we need some new batteries and aspirin. Anything else?
I think that's it for now. I'll add those to our shopping list, and we can head to the store shortly.
Great. I'm glad we did this. After all, it's better to be over-prepared than caught off guard.
True. It certainly feels better to be ready for whatever comes our way.
第二部分看到 inspect 这个单字，它是动词，它的意思是检查或是审视。例如 The customs officer inspected my baggage. 海关官员检查我的行李。又或者说 The chef inspected each apple for soft spots before he bought them. 这位主厨在买苹果前检查每一颗是否有软烂的地方。再来看到名词 expiration， 表示期满或是截止。例如 My passport is nearing its expiration, so I need to renew it soon. 我的护照快要到期了，所以我需要尽快更新。也可以说 The coupon is valid until the printed expiration date. 这张优惠券有效期至上面印的截止日期。最后看到 seal 这个单字，它是动词，表示密封或是把点点点封好。我们可以说 Janet sealed the tomatoes in airtight jars to preserve them. Janet 把番茄封在密封罐里来保存。也可以说 Please seal the envelope securely before mailing it. 在寄信之前，请把这个信封密实的封起来。
Okay, let's continue with the next dialogue for today. The title is Inspecting the Emergency Kit. Now, if you inspect something, you just take a close look at it and you make sure everything is okay, or you get information that you did not know before. So, yeah, you look at something very carefully to assess its condition and to find out if there's anything wrong with it. So here they're inspecting the emergency kit. And Olivia brings the emergency kit, and they start inspecting the items inside it. They start looking at those items to make sure everything is in order.
All right, so let's see what's going on here. Ethan says, first up, let's check the non-perishable food. All right, so they're going to go through the emergency kit item by item, starting with the non-perishable food. Seems like a good idea. Things that are non-perishable, they don't go bad. Basically, this is food that is either dried or it's in cans or something like that. Fresh fruit is very perishable, right? That's why we put it in our fridge. If you leave a banana just sitting on the kitchen counter in a day or two, it won't be very good to eat. But canned food can last for years. Dried food can last for a very long time, like dry noodles or something like that. So these would be the non-perishable items, the foods that they can buy and put in there and probably keep in there for a couple of years at least, because they're stored and packaged very well. And he's got a good list here of typical things you might find. We've got canned beans, dried fruits, and energy bars. So the beans are in a can, the fruits have basically dried out, so there's no water there to rot, and the energy bars are packaged up in plastic wrap and stuff like that. None of them are past their expiration date. So looking at all these things carefully, which is what you should be doing, you're looking for that little date, that little number that's printed on the label, maybe on the top of the can in the case of the beans, or somewhere on the packaging for the fruits and the energy bars. And it has a date in the future sometime, hopefully in the future. If it's in the past, well, it's worth throwing away. And that date is telling you when it expires. Basically when it goes bad, when it won't be fresh, when you might notice that the flavor's not so good, or if it's really past the expiration date, it might actually be poisonous or toxic or something like that. It might make you feel pretty sick if you eat it, but certain things you can maybe go past the expiration date by a day or two, but certainly dairy products and things like that, we pay a lot of attention to those expiration dates, those dates that tell you, the consumer, and the people in the store putting them on the shelves, when the food is fresh and when it would maybe be a better idea to dispose of it and buy a new one.
Yep, expiration is a noun and the verb is to expire, which means to reach the end of a certain period of time or a certain condition of something. So you could say that your driver's license has expired and you need to get it renewed. But here, these items are not past their expiration date, so they can still use them. They have a long shelf life, as we say. And Olivia says, great. How about the clean water? Okay, they need to have a supply of water in case there's an emergency. And Ethan says, all the bottles are sealed and look fine. And what about the flashlights? If something's sealed, there is a layer of protection between that thing and the outside, so the water cannot get contaminated.
When you open the bottle of water, you'll hear that crack of the little plastic part sort of breaking. So now you've unsealed the water. Maybe there'll be a piece of plastic over the top. You kind of peel that off. It's been glued on. So as long as that's all tightly closed, it will keep it safe, keep it fresh, and keep it protected from bacteria and other things getting in. So everything looks good there. What about the flashlights? So the non-perishable food they have looks good. What about the flashlights? Because remember, when they had that big typhoon a few years ago, there was a power failure. There was a blackout. So yes, having a source of light, especially a portable source of light like a flashlight that's battery powered, that you can basically pick up. No matter when the last time you used it was, you can pick it up and use it and find your way, because if there's an earthquake in the middle of the night, the electricity will probably be off, and you don't want to be blindly groping around in your apartment looking for your family members. So a flashlight is very useful, and good news, they have one.
Right, so they're checking the batteries, and Olivia says, let's put the batteries in and see if they still work. She puts the batteries in, and then she turns on the flashlights to test them, and Ethan says, they both work, but that one looks a little dim, so let's get some new batteries for it. Of course, we've got different intensities of light. Something can be bright and something can be dim. You might see dim lights indoors, for example. During a performance, the lights will be quite dim, so you can see the performers on stage. And they're going to get some new batteries for this one particular flashlight that is a little dim. The other one, I guess, is okay. And Olivia says, noted, I understand. We're going to do that. Let's move on to the first aid supplies. Anything expired? Has anything expired? Have they passed their expiration date? They're checking out the first aid supplies, which would be bandages, gauze, plasters, things like that.
All right, so looking at those things, similar to looking at the food, you're looking for dates, because some of these things, especially medicines, will also have expiration dates. They could make you sick, but more likely they just won't work as well. So if you're taking an aspirin that's past the expiration date, you might not find that it has the same pain-killing effectiveness as one that is newer and fresher, as it were. So the aspirin is expired. So maybe it sort of reached its expiration date in 2021 or 2022 or something like that. So that will have to be replaced. Everything else looks good. So looking at all the other dates, everything looks fine. The boxes look fine. They haven't been affected by damp or leaky water or anything like that. So everything will work. And Olivia says, all right, so we need some new batteries and aspirin. I can imagine her writing these things down on a list for the next time they go to the drugstore or the supermarket or something like that. Anything else, she says? Anything else in the survival kit that needs to be replaced?
Well, Ethan says, I think that's it for now. I think we've checked everything out. We have inspected the emergency kit thoroughly. I'll add those to our shopping list and we can head to the store shortly. So they've noted some things that they need, the aspirin and some batteries. So they have a note for those things and they're going to head to the store to buy those things. Olivia says, great. I'm glad we did this. I feel very relieved. After all, it's better to be over-prepared than caught off guard. If you want to be prepared, you're ready for something. If you're over-prepared, maybe you've prepared too much stuff, but I guess it's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared.
Exactly, and being under-prepared is another way of kind of saying being caught off guard. Something happens and you're not prepared for it. You are caught off guard. Going to school and seeing all your friends getting ready to write a test and you're going, what, a test? We have a test today? Ooh, you've been caught off guard. You weren't expecting that to happen. You've been surprised. It's not always in a bad way, but often in kind of a bad, shocking, oh, gee, I wish I'd known about this type of situation. And certainly waking up in the middle of an earthquake and not having a flashlight and an emergency kit, that would definitely be a good definition of being caught off guard, something you want to avoid. So yes, as Roger said, better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. And Ethan agrees, true. It is definitely a smart thing to have this kit and a very responsible thing as well to keep checking it once in a while. It certainly feels better to be ready for whatever comes our way. Both of them may have been in the Scouts. Of course, the Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, be prepared is their motto, and it's not a bad rule to live by.
And we could also say it's better to be safe than sorry. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. Here comes Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。在课文第一部分的对话里， Ethan 说 It hadn't occurred to me how much we rely on running water until it was gone。 好，那这边有3个重点哦。第一个要介绍的是 until 的用法。 Until 它表示直到或是直到点点点为止，那它可以当介系词，这时候后面就是接表示时间的名词。它也可以当连接词，那后面就是接子句。那当我们用 not 点点点 until 点点点，则是表达直到什么什么才开始怎么样，这是用来指说情况一直到某个时间点后才改变。就像文中他用 not 去搭配 until 加子句来表达说，等到没有自来水，直到没有自来水，我才意识到我们有多么依赖它。好，那我们这边也造一个例句。He didn't text me back until the next day. 直到隔天他才回我讯息。好，第二个介绍的重点是 something occurred to somebody. 这可以表达某人想到某事。动词 occur 它就有发生、出现的意思。不过在这边呢，它则有被想到或者是浮现的语义，就好像某个想法突然浮现在脑海当中。那我们也常用 it occurs to somebody 加上 that 子句，或者是 it occurs to somebody 加上不定词 to be 来表达。那么 it 是虚主词，就是用来代替后面的 that 子句或者是不定词。举例来说， it occurred to him that he had left his wallet at home。他突然想到他把皮夹放在家里，忘了带出门了。那至于课文句子，它则是用虚主词 it 来代替后方的名词子句 How much we rely on running water。 那当我们用 how 加上形容词或副词，加主词加动词，用这样的方式来当名词子句时， how 在后面加上形容词或副词是用来强调有多怎么样，所以它就是要表达我们有多么的依赖自来水。 好，那么第三个介绍的重点是片语动词 rely on 或者是 rely upon 可以表达依靠、依赖、仰赖，意思就相当于 count on, depend on， 后面可以接人或事物当受词。那我们造两个例句。Pam relies on her brother to drive her to work. Pam 靠她哥哥开车载她去上班。Many people rely on their phones for everyday tasks. 许多人仰赖手机处理日常事务。好，那也补充一个意思相近的片语动词是 bank on. Bank 当动词，它原本有那种把钱存进银行的意思，延伸的片语 bank on 则可以表达指望、仰赖、依靠或是确信，就好像你对某人事物的依靠如同信任在银行存钱一样。举例来说 If I were you, I wouldn't bank on him to fix a problem. 如果我是你，我不会指望他解决那个问题的。好，那以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾这些单字吧。
Disaster. The flood was a disaster that killed many people and left others homeless. Previous. Vanessa has more responsibilities in her current job than she had in her previous one. Intense. The cold was so intense that Jay decided to wear his heaviest winter coat. Electricity. Electricity powers our modern world in countless ways. Absolutely. Would you like some cake? Mrs. Floyd asked. Absolutely, Malcolm replied. Inspect. We should inspect the car before buying it to make sure that it has no hidden problems. Seal. Please seal the package well to prevent any damage. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.